Welcome to the Darkstream. Vox Day, voxday.blogspot.com. And I apologize for being tardy. We had to fight off an attack of the robots. So hopefully the pre-scheduling has permitted all of you to show up right away. Looks like there's a whole bunch of comments already, and so I'll have to look over those at some point in time. Anyhow, it's interesting to see how this works with the combination of the multi-streaming and the scheduling on YouTube. Looks like it worked okay. So tonight, what we're going to talk about is a recent thread on intelligence that was inspired by a little tweet storm by Taleb, for whom I have considerable respect and more than a little admiration. I'm going to grab something here real quick before I take that down. Where did I put it? Here we go. Sometimes it's nice to be able to turn the camera off. All right, so this is a collection of 4 books. 3 of them are excellent. One of them is basically a filler. The Black Swan is Taleb's most famous work. Fooled by Randomness is kind of a follow-on to it, explanation of it. And then what is probably Taleb's most significant work, in my opinion, Anti-Fragile. The collection of all 4, Bed of Procrustes, is just a bunch of quotes that Taleb likes. It's fine. It's just not particularly interesting to me. Anyhow, the whole collection, the whole box collection is called Incerto. And I think so much of it that you can actually find it on the Castalia Direct store. It's described: the landmark investigation of luck, uncertainty, probability, opacity, human error, risk, disorder, and decision-making in a world we don't understand. It's really good. It's fantastic. And that's one of the reasons why I was disappointed in what Taleb produced and his general opinion on intelligence in particular. And now, to make it clear, everybody makes mistakes. Nobody's perfect. And I don't think any less of Taleb just because I think he happens to be wrong on this particular area. So, but first, this is not a wine stream, but I do have to say, I got this for Christmas from our family in Spain, and I'm totally stoked about it. What those of you who are wine connoisseurs may or may not realize is the significance of this label, Torres. They're the big Spanish wine producer. I'm a particular fan of their Celeste Crianza. And this, it's a Priorat. And it's the first time Torres has done a Priorat. Priorat is kind of the new wine du jour from Spain. So anyhow, in celebration of this channel recently hitting 1 million views, I thought I would have a glass with you. So anyhow, it is the, what's it called? The Salmos 2015 Torres Priorat. So anyhow, it's Torres is one of my favorite wineries, and I'm a big fan. So How much do you think it cost? I have absolutely no idea. Nick's comment cracks me up. My IQ is 117 and I'm only 5'7". Vox and Owen would hate me. It is kind of funny. I mean, Owen, as we know, hates short people. I don't actually hate midwits, but I am sort of famously intolerant of them. So anyhow, but here's to all you guys. Who knows how long this YouTube ride is going to last. That's one of the things that makes it interesting. But 1 million views, 11,000 subscribers. Thanks very much for the interest, and I appreciate it. So, and one of these days we may even arrange to get super chats going if I ever bother to turn on the monetization and so forth. How tall is Vox? Vox is exactly 175 centimeters tall, which is a little bit, it's closer to 5'9" than 5'8", but it's in there. So I'm actually almost exactly the size and weight of my favorite NFL cornerback, who's now retired. So, anyhow, pretty average over here. In Europe, I'm actually, a little bit taller than the average that you see. Obviously, total midget compared to a giant bear like the big bear. What IQ range do you regard as midwit? Midwits range in general from 105, I would say 105 to 120. They tend to be people that are smarter than the average, and that's part of what gives them the attitude. They're used to being smarter than normal people, and so therefore they think that they're highly intelligent, but they're not, and they tend to really react badly when they run into the genuinely highly intelligent. So, speaking of intelligence, let's go over Taleb's and Taleb's IQ thread together. So, IQ measures an inferior form of intelligence stripped of second-order effects meant to select paper shufflers, obedient, intellectual, yet idiots. This is a true statement followed by a falsehood. IQ does it's all IQ doesn't actually measure intelligence at all. It is a proxy for intelligence. Okay? Intelligence is not something that we know well enough to quantify. How many, we know exactly what an inch is, so we can measure exactly how tall you are. But we don't know is exactly what an IQ point is. And so, to say it measures an inferior form of intelligence, no, I don't think that's correct. I do think it's correct to say IQ measures a particular range of intelligences, but it is not truly a measure. It is a proxy. Okay, so you don't you can't put too much weight on it. You have to understand that it is a heuristic. It is a tool, and so. However, what is totally false is that it is meant to select paper shufflers and obedient, intellectual, yet idiots. This is simply false. It's not designed to do anything of the sort. And it actually does a very good job of selecting those who have a high level of verbal acuity as well as a high level of mathematical capability. And so let's go on. When someone asks you a question in real life, you focus first on why is he asking that, which slows down. Fat Tony versus Dr. John. He's referring to his own work here. Okay, fine. I don't actually tend to do that. When someone asks me a question in real life, I usually just answer the question. So, 2, it takes a certain type of person to waste intelligent concentration on classroom academic problems. These are lifeless bureaucrats who can muster sterile motivation. Some people can only focus on problems that are real, not fictional textbook ones. Well, here we see the root of Taleb's foundational and fundamental and incorrect assumption. What he's focusing on is he's focusing on people who are successful in the professions, who are successful in the bureaucracies, who are successful in the office, and so forth. But what we also know is that the most highly intelligent people are actually systematically excluded from those professions. And in fact, the correlation between IQ and career success in a professional capacity only holds up to about an IQ of 133. Once you get past that level, then the correlation begins to break down and begins to decline until you reach an IQ of 150, at which point there is no correlation at all. In fact, there's a 97% exclusion of people with 150 IQs from academia, from the various professions, from the CEO positions and that sort of stuff. If you look at most politicians, most academics, they're not really that smart. They tend to be between 1 and 3 SDs, between 115 and 145 IQ. And the higher it gets, the less successful people happen to be. And that is mostly because of what they call the communication gap. Very few people of a high intelligence level have the ability to communicate with people of average intelligence. And now some people can do it, and in fact, Taleb, I suspect, is one of those people. Owen Benjamin is another one. Donald Trump is another one. I am not one. I have learned in some respects to communicate better with people of middle and average intelligence, but it is a learned skill to the extent that I have it, and I'm still not very good at it. So look at the hordes with high IQ from measurement who are failures in the real world rather than the 50% correlation between IQ and success in salaried employment and jobs that select for education. Huge survivorship bias. See, he's got it backwards there because he's not aware of the systematic exclusion of the cognitive elite. So this is the problem that even someone who's a brilliant original thinker like Taleb is subject to. It's something that we're all subject to, is that if you don't have the relevant knowledge, you're going to make mistakes, because even if you build up a correct logical case, then you're going to reach incorrect conclusions. Even if the syllogism is correct, the fact that you started with a false foundation means you're going to reach a false conclusion. Gene says, why is he not aware of this? I'm surprised by that. I have no idea. I don't know. But regardless, it's true. He says 37 of 38 PhDs in finance blew up in 1998. Well, that's fine and all, but an actual study of the IQs of the professors and PhDs, or the PhD equivalents at one of the top English universities, I think it was Cambridge, the highest IQ of any of them measured was 139. Okay, that's nearly a complete standard deviation below Owen. Okay? I mean, how many people would assume that a comedian like the Big Bear is nearly a standard deviation more intelligent than the most intelligent professor they could find at Cambridge? All right. Um, and so the Matt says, is this exclusion deliberate? I think in some situations, but I think more of it is actually just the fact is related to the communications gap. And so if you look at another big example is, IQ tests have been systematically removed from the admissions process of U.S. education. They have been, the whole IQ aspect has been completely removed for nearly 30 years. See, the PSAT and the SAT until 1992 were functionally IQ tests. And so you knew that people like me, people like the very intelligent gentleman who sent me this bottle of wine, we were both national merit, either semifinalists or finalists. I was a finalist. I don't know what my friend was, but he was definitely national merit. Hillary Clinton was national merit. What does that mean when you say someone's national merit? It means that their IQ is at least 3 points higher than the minimum required for entry into Mensa. National merit was more cognitively exclusive than Mensa. So every year, the colleges knew who the 1,500 or so most intelligent members of the incoming freshman class were. They don't know that anymore. And so that's why you have, ridiculous low IQ, relatively low IQ people like David Hogg being accepted to what is supposedly one of the most prestigious universities in the country. Where can one get an accurate IQ assessment? Then you just need to find a place that performs the whatever Wechsler IQ test. Probably costs you $100 or something. It's not that it's not difficult to find. Didn't Clinton fail the DC bar exam? I think that was Bill. I don't recall Hillary failing any bar exams. I would not trust a lazy, high IQ person over a hardworking, commuter, average, smart person. It depends what you're talking about. One of the reasons why high IQ people are lazy is because they often figure out a more effective way to get something done. Technological advancement to a certain extent can be reasonably described as lazy people, smart lazy people figuring out how it would be easier to get things done than just working hard. Gene says, Hillary's high IQ makes sense. It aligns with her clearly terrible social skills. Exactly. And people wrongly assume that Trump is less intelligent than he is because he's so successful at communicating with normal people. So, but it's not about that. We're just, what we're talking about here, where Taleb's making a mistake is he's questioning the entire idea. He's claiming that the proxy is designed and useful for something that it clearly isn't, given what we know about high IQ people. He says, 5, if you renamed IQ from intelligent quotient to functionary quotient or SQ salary quotient, then some of the stuff will be true. It measures best the ability to be a good slave. Intellectual yet idiots want to build a top-down world where IWIs have the edge. Well, again, that doesn't even make any sense. Taleb clearly hasn't been paying any attention to what's going on. The intellectual yet idiots in the academy have systematically worked to remove every measure of IQ from the process because they know it makes them look bad. The highest IQs make terrible slaves. Did you know that if you have an IQ above a surprisingly low level, it will disqualify you from being employed as a policeman in some jurisdictions? because they don't want the high IQ troublemakers. And sufficiently intelligent people almost invariably turn out to be troublemakers. Why do you think people like Owen and I are banned from Twitter? Why do you think that we're constantly under pressure on the various social media platforms? It's because of this systematic exclusion of the cognitive elite. It's not just that our views are so wrong, so evil, so hateful. It's that they cannot deal with the arguments that we present. They cannot attack them successfully. They have no choice but to try to prevent people from listening to us, because anytime they try to engage with us, we shoot them down without any trouble. With no trouble at all. Why do you think Ben Shapiro runs away from me like a little bitch, despite the fact that he claims that he's, so smart and will debate, is a master debater and all that sort of thing? They know. And so, the fact that somebody's a nerd doesn't actually mean that they're that smart. It's a behavior pattern. It's not a measure of intelligence. The idea that people in the universities now, or that people in the bureaucracies now, are the best and brightest and the smartest, that's ridiculous. That's just absolutely not the case. 6. If you take a Popperian Hayekian view on intelligence, then you would realize that to measure it, you would need to know the skills needed in the ecology, which is again a fallacy of intellectual hubris. No, that's not correct. He's correct to say that IQ is not actually a measure. It's not. It's a proxy. But what he's trying to do is he's trying to actually shift the definition of what intelligence is. He's to a certain extent playing a near Petersonian word game here. 7. Perhaps the worst problem with IQ is that it seems to select for people who don't like to say, there is no answer, don't waste time, find something else. I remember the 1998 blow-ups. Well, again, as a number of people have pointed out, the 1998 blow-ups are not because smart people screwed up. It's because dishonest people were shifting the burden of risk to someone else. And it's frankly a little bit shocking to see the guy who popularized the term skin in the game to be blaming these blow-ups on intelligence. It's not. Vox Day, Pope J. Peterson thinks the world of IQ as well. Doesn't that give your faith in IQ some I don't have any faith in IQ. I repeatedly tell people that IQ is overrated. Let me give you the explanation of what IQ is in a metaphorical terms. IQ is the size of the gun barrel. It's the caliber, it's how big around it is. Okay, so that gives you a really powerful weapon, right? Well, no, because you got to know where to aim it. And intelligence is not knowing how to use your intelligence or where to aim your intelligence. That is wisdom. And wisdom and intelligence are completely different. Jordan Peterson is correct about that. And then there's a third component that you have to use, and that component is information. And information can come from experience, or it can come from education. And so when you talk about intelligence being important, all that means is that you have the ability to focus considerably more cognitive power on something than the average. But you still need wisdom, and you still need experience, information, education, all of these things in order to effectively put fire on target. If you look at if you look at where, like when I focus on something, look at how devastating my takedown of Jordan Peterson was compared to a lot of the other folks who wanted to take him down. My approach was considerably more effective because I have that larger cognitive gun barrel, but I also have developed sufficient experience and one hopes wisdom over time to be able to utilize that capacity. So you need to be aware that intelligence in and of itself is no more intrinsically useful than height. Height can be extremely useful, but that doesn't mean that you're going to be a great basketball player just because you're tall. I remember I played basketball in junior high with a kid who was 6'11", but he couldn't dunk, he couldn't jump, and he was so slow that he really couldn't play basketball well. And the best player on our team was like 5'7", could shoot the rock, hit from anywhere. Understand that the IQ fetishists are generally incorrect on a individual level. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. That doesn't mean that IQ is a unrealistic proxy for intelligence. And as it turns out, one of the most significant aspects in a societal sense is the average IQ. It's really not the outliers like me that matter. It's whether your average IQ is 104, 100, or 95. That makes a massive difference. And that's why I have that picture on the cover. I don't know if you recognized the picture on the cover, but that's a picture of the bridge in Atlanta burning and then before it collapsed. The reason it collapsed was a series of absolutely disastrous decisions by low IQ people. First somebody didn't understand that inflammable meant that it could start on fire. Secondly, they thought it was a good idea to store these extra materials under the bridge. And then somebody else of subpar intelligence thought that it would be a great idea to smoke around these inflammable materials that were stacked under a bridge. Well, one of the reasons why third world societies don't function as well is because of the relentless stupidity of their average people. They have a difficult time anticipating the consequences of their actions. Now, there's other problems as well, but there's a book that came out about 2-3 years ago. It wasn't as well written or as detailed as I would have liked, but it did make a pretty strong case that the most important aspect of the quality of a society is the average level of intelligence in that society. What about the bridge collapse in Genoa? Well, Italians are famously corrupt, and they're famously lazy about taking care of things. And so, it's not a surprise. I do not like driving on those high bridges, the ones like going down into Tuscany and so forth. I mean, they're it's kind of terrifying, especially in Rome too. The traffic bridges in the city. I mean, they just look like they're going to fall down at any minute. Didn't exactly surprise me to hear that. So, anyhow, let's go on. IQ is an academic contrived notion, and the problem is that in academia there is no difference between academia and the real world. In the real world there is, which explains why Primal Polly, while an honest researcher, can't see where we are coming from. IQ may be a academic contrived notion, but there's no question that academia hates IQ more than anyone, which again is why they are systematically excluding it, both in terms of the individuals and in terms of the processes that allow individuals to enter the academy. 9. It is precisely as a quant that I doubt IQ. I've spent 34 years working with high IQ quants. I've rarely seen them survive, not blow up on tail events. Those high IQ who have survived, like finance quant renaissance, happen to be hugely street smart. Okay, so he's drawing upon his experience with high IQ people and noticing that a lot of them tend to lack common sense. Okay, fine. So what? I mean, that literally says nothing about his point. Skin in the Game shows that the only robust measure of rationality and intelligence is survival, avoidance of ruin, left tail, absorbing barrier, ergodicity. Nothing that does not account for ability to survive counts as a measure of intelligence, just philosophaster BS. Okay, this is just total bullshit. I mean, he's trying to redefine intelligence. Peterson says that truth is survival. Taleb says intelligence and rationality are survival. It's bullshit. Survival cannot be related to intelligence because first of all, larger heads mean more intelligence on average. It's a very good proxy for intellectual capacity is the size of the head. Well, guess what? It is more difficult for large-brained babies to be born. Okay? I mean, what we're seeing here is the limitations of the technical mind. These guys, no matter how smart they are, and remember, I grew up with a father who he didn't bother turning in his final thesis, so he never got his PhD, but he successfully graduated from the PhD program at MIT in mechanical engineering. All right. The kind of mistakes that he always used to make are exactly the kind of mistakes that Taleb makes. He's looking too closely at too limited a range of situations and drawing conclusions that simply do not suffice to explain the larger picture, and in fact are very easily disproven by anyone who is looking at the larger, more holistic picture. You cannot redefine intelligence or rationality as survival and the avoidance of ruin any more than you can redefine truth that way. He's making exactly the same mistake that Jordan Peterson makes. The only difference here is that I think that Taleb is making this mistake honestly, whereas I think that Jordan Peterson is absolutely lying his evil ass off when he's doing that. S. Ehlers says, IQ tests favor Jews and East Indians if you go by success rate. That's not true. That's not true at all. Why do you think that the Ivy League admissions offices are disfavoring IQ? It's because it doesn't favor the Jews. I mean, all of these people talking about, high Jewish IQ are buying into a complete myth. It's not true at all. If they wouldn't need the affirmative action in the Ivy League if they did. Could you still get a measure of IQ from someone with a brain or abnormality? Yes. Survival depends on birth rates, not IQ tests. That is exactly true. Vox Day, have you ever thought of changing to Vox Night for a change? No. Let's see. David Hogg got into Harvard, for crying out loud. Exactly. Let's go on. 11. A robust use of IQ is low scores for special needs people, but then practically any measure would work to detect problem and improvement, or no measure, just a conversation. Well, why would you think that IQ is a reasonable measure on the low side but not on the high side? I mean, this is just getting into silliness here. Basically, he doesn't want to try to defend the idea that retards and morons have low IQs. And so he's trying to say, well, it only applies on the low end rather than the high end. This is just silly. If someone came up with a numerical well-being quotient, WBQ, or sleep quotient, SQ, trying to mimic temperature or other physical quantity, you'd find it absurd. But put enough academics with physics envy on it and it will become an official measure. I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, you could come up with a sleep quotient without any trouble. Maybe I'll work on that. Because it's all about who is able to be more rested on a certain number of hours. Now, how do we apply rested? How do we quantify rested? We have the same problem there that we do with IQ. And yet, it's pretty easy to tell whether somebody is rested or not, isn't it? So my sleep quotient, if I designed a sleep quotient, what I would do is I would base it on who was able to appear fully rested on the smallest amount of sleep. So we could use minutes and divide that up by the perception of restedness. Maybe we could have two definitions: an external observation of restedness and a self-assessment of restedness, divided by the number of minutes, divided by the number of minutes, and then turn that into the sleep quotient. And you know what? It will work, because some people are capable of getting by on considerably less sleep than others. Children need a lot more sleep than the elderly do. Now that I'm 50, I don't need anywhere nearly as much sleep as I used to. It's actually kind of shocking. Somebody asked once, well, doesn't Vox live in Italy? Then why is he not even starting the Darkstreams until 1 a.m.? First of all, I'm a night owl. And secondly, I don't need that much sleep, So anyhow, let's see. BS, you made that BS up on the fly. If you're talking about the sleep quotient, yes, I did just make it up. That's the whole point, is that a sleep quotient is a perfectly reasonable thing. You can come up with a heuristic that is a proxy for your ability to sleep more efficiently than someone else. Okay? Taleb is saying IQ is so nonsensical that it would be something as ridiculous as it, and yet I'm pointing out that you can actually do it. You know why? Because I have a high IQ. For a measure, it needs to be unique, monotonic, or at least transitive. Or for a measure to be a measure, it needs to be unique, monotonic, or at least transitive. Hence, IQ is not a measure, but something for psycholofasters to BS about. No, Taleb, it's a proxy. Proxies are not measures. Proxies do not need to be quantified in the same way that a measure does. Any measure of intelligence without convexity is sterile. Whatever. We don't need to get into that. IQ is most predictive of performance in military training with correlation of about 0.5, which is circular since hiring isn't random. I don't know what claim he's basing that on, but I do know that the military does have IQ requirements for certain tasks. You don't want a submariner with a low IQ. You don't want a nuclear engineer with a low IQ. Let's see. So far, IQ isn't a measure of intelligence of intelligence but unintelligence. It loses its precision as you move away from 70 left tail, where it's most hype. Some jobs it predicts 15 to 63% of the time, 10% if you demassage data. Again, he's totally failing to account for the systematic exclusion of the highly intelligent. Then he talks about a graph that he made, whatever, I don't care about pictures. A general problem with social scientists and IQ idiots, they can intuit the very terms they are using. Verbalism, they have a skin-deep statistical education and can't translate something as trivial as correlation or explain variance into meaning, especially under nonlinearities. He's talking about academics there. Academics are shockingly bad at statistics. That's true. Again, this has nothing to do with intelligence. This has to do with the failure of the university education system. This tweet storm has no psychological references. Simply, the field is bust. So far, 50% of the research does not replicate, and papers that do have a weaker effect. Actually, that's true of all science. In fact, I plan to talk about that sometime. Even in the hard sciences, the non-replication rate is at best 50%. Yes, psychology is nonsense. The social sciences are nonsense. So too is most of the so-called hard sciences. Keep in mind, mathematics is not science. If you look at my P hacking above, all the numbers are upper bound adcore and the story is grin. Again, he's got bad data. This tweet storm irritated many. 1. Charlatans with something to sell. Without IQ and other testing, psychologists have little to sell society. Okay, fine. People who want some races to be inferior. Well, they literally are inferior in terms of IQ, so it's not about wanting. Anyhow, I'm not irritated by it at all. I thought it was disappointing. Why? Because it's disappointing whenever you see someone you admire make these kind of easily avoided mistakes. I was also disappointed when I read the book of Umberto Eco's debate with an Italian cardinal who's a friend of his. And his arguments supporting his atheist agnostic position were trivial. It was really disappointing to see somebody, a great mind, one of the greatest novelists of the 20th century, one of the greatest humanists of the 20th century, one of the men that I admire most, and it was really disappointing to see the quality of his arguments on a subject that he had clearly thought about that much. Now, in Taleb's defense, I will say that it's probably not a matter that he had given a whole lot of thought to. And so it's not that surprising that the argument that he presented was not particularly impressive. It was based on bad data. It was based on incorrect assumptions, and therefore he ended up with incorrect conclusions. So that's my is Taleb just upset that his country has an average IQ of 82? I very much doubt it. What is the average IQ of Jordan Peterson fans? I would guess 105. I don't know. I mean, Jordan Peterson fans are the societal losers. His books are specifically written for the low status males in society. That's who he addresses. He specifically says that in 12 Rules for Life. They do tend to be, but I don't know that they're necessarily more intelligent than the average, especially based on the sort of attacks that his fans have directed towards me. So it's hard for me to say. And frankly, I can't tell the difference between, somebody who's in the 105 range versus 95 range. I mean, if you think about it, that's like asking, a normal person, like, do you think that retarded individual has an IQ of 45 or 50? How can you tell? He's drooling on himself. I don't know how to quantify that. Let's see. Even a high IQ person can be a loser. Well, of course, absolutely they can. I would say that one of the hardest things in the world to be is a high IQ woman. It's very, very difficult. Excuse me. Which classical composer had the highest IQ, if you had to guess? I would guess. I want to guess Mozart, but he was such a musical genius at an early age that he might have been a bit of a savant. I would say Johann Sebastian Bach would be my guess. Vox is calling us former Peterson fan losers. Well, I'm not calling you losers. I'm telling you who Jordan Peterson wrote his book for. I'm describing what he intended to do and who he was addressing. Now, maybe his fans were not the people he's addressing, but I would assume so. Actually, Wagner's another good point. I mean, the interesting about Wagner was that his abilities his range of abilities were a little broader than the average great composer. So, can a nation be happy without a high average Q? Yes, of course. But that doesn't mean that it's going to be a successful society or one that you necessarily want to live in. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to the Caribbean, but it's generally a pretty happy place, it seems. You can. A friend of mine who lives on a Caribbean island talks about how it's no wonder they haven't advanced at all. You can live by just sitting around and literally picking up the fruit that drops from the trees. It's not a bad way to live. You can't live that way up north. You'll die. How dumbed down do you have to make your arguments in order to talk to us? I don't even know how to answer that question. I actually tried to specifically dumb down my columns for a limited time, maybe about 3 months. I actually wrote 2 columns, a regular column and then one that I tried to dumb down to the preferred writing level, and it didn't work. Why do you think people are so sensitive about intelligence? Because they put too much value on it. They basically, they use intelligence to distinguish us from the animals. And so there's this weird idea that somehow if you have more intelligence, you are a higher form of humanity, and if you have less intelligence, then you're a lesser form of humanity, which is just ridiculous. It is, your humanity does not depend on your level of intelligence. It has nothing to do with it. But there's this assumption, and so for some, and also I think it's because another factor is that you can't see it, so it's easier to deny. Because you can't see it, because you can't quantify it, it's easier to pretend it doesn't exist. But that's ridiculous. Plenty of things that we can't see, plenty of things that we can't properly quantify still exist. Existence, that's a really, especially for a Christian, that's a weirdly materialistic argument to make. We can't quantify it, so it must not exist, and it's ridiculous. We know love exists. Quantify love. We know trust exists. Quantify trust. You can't. What do you think is the average and max IQ of your fan base? Well, I know that there are several dozen people with IQs in excess of 150. So if you simply do the math, if we were to construct I'll have to work it out, but I would say that the average is probably around 110, which is actually extremely high if you work out the math. Maybe a little bit more. But why were there no great female composers? Because that level of musical ability is an outlier. It's probably very highly associated with a mathematical mind, and that tends to favor men. And also men have a greater ability to focus, and that level of composition takes a lot of focus. Can a dishonest low IQ person outwit and control a high IQ person? Absolutely. Hey Vox, who's your favorite comedian, dead or alive? Well, I mean, just in terms of people that I like, it's definitely the Big Bear. In terms of the comedian that I think is funniest, I would have to say Simon Evans, the English comedian. I think he's very, very funny. Let's see. .110 IQ seems quite low for your audience. I doubt many people below 110 follow you. You got to keep in mind that you can't confuse the commenters with the people who read it and follow it. I think you, and also, like I said, I should actually do, maybe it is too low, but I figure that we've probably got 30 people with IQs in the 150 plus range. So we can use that to create a distribution curve based on the total estimated blog readership, and that will allow us to determine what the median is. So we'll figure that out. Big Bear needs a big hug. What does Big Bear need a big hug for? Do you have any advice for a Sigma in a corporate environment? Try to get involved in a small division, where they kind of do pseudo startup stuff. I'm spacing on the term. IBM coined a term for it. You want to get assigned to a project where you have a lot of freedom to operate. Don't try to work your way up the corporate ladder. You're not going to make it. I'm the high IQ guy in my world. I like Vox because I recognize his is higher than mine. I'm IQ starved for stimulation. That may be so, but you shouldn't be. I mean, the great thing about books is that it gives you the ability to interact with the greatest minds in human history. I got a wonderful present from my wife for Christmas. I don't know if you see these red books right there, but it's the first edition of the History of the Peninsular War by my favorite historian, Charles Oman, favorite military historian. Well, second favorite, I guess. Martin Van Crevel's my favorite now. But by Charles Oman, and it's fascinating to read it. It's wonderful to read it. And so I think that you should spend more time with the great minds of the past. If you're hungry for intellectual engagement. Let's see. I'm not in the 150 plus range. Maybe that's more common than I realize. No, it's not common at all. But there's a fair number of them. I mean, they tend to congregate just like everyone else. I mean, we had in the digital ghetto, where at one point, 5 of us guys were living together. 4 were above 140, and 3 were, 150 plus. So, birds of a feather and all that. Let's see. Most don't. Let's see. Is Owen beginning to warm up to ethno-nationalism yet? Ethno-nationalism is redundant. You're either a nationalist or you're not. High IQ extroverts want conversation. Maybe. Look how masculine Vox is. Yeah, that's just the. This is just the receding hairline, I'm sure. To be honest, beginning to doubt that you ever hit merit finalist. Benjamin is bright, but he isn't a thinker. I don't care what you doubt. It's a fact. I'm a confirmed. I've a confirmed Mensa member. I'm a confirmed National Merit finalist. This isn't news. This isn't a surprise. This isn't hidden. It's a fact. If you doubt the facts, then that's your problem, not mine. You need to understand that the facts are not about what you want the world to be. The world is what it is. If you don't like what I'm saying, if you don't like the things I like, then you don't like them. But intelligence is not defined by what you like. What's the difference? What's the difference between ethno-nationalism and omni-nationalism? Well, ethno-nationalism is redundant. I mean, what ethno-nationalism really is, when usually, if you talk to a self-identified ethno-nationalist, is it's racial imperialism. Richard Spencer is not a nationalist. He's opposed to nations. He supports racial imperialism, and he wants the nations to be subsumed into race the same way that globalists want the nations to be subsumed into one world government. Okay. Easy to claim facts that have no record. Yeah, go ahead, look it up. See, people like that, I mean, that's classic midwit. That guy is offended. He is offended by the fact that I'm so much smarter than he is. So some people will deny the existence of IQ. Other people will just accuse, somebody like me of lying or something. It's stupid, and then what they'll do is they'll try to challenge you to prove it, and then once you prove it, they'll act like, oh well, I was just joking anyhow, or well, that doesn't really mean anything. There's no point in engaging with these people. They're not engaged in a dialectic process. That's just pure disqualified discredit rhetoric. I mean, when he first brought it up, my first instinct was just to ban him, but I thought, let's give him a chance. Maybe he actually has something, has a legitimate opinion. But it's just rhetoric. So, anyhow, let me, on that note, let me bid you all a good night. Thank you for tuning in. I'm glad that the scheduled stream works well. And thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you at the next Darkstream. Have a good evening.